Chapter 14. A Tulip Flower Bed. Prey had lain awake for 2 hours before he judged it safe to rise. He waited until he knew Gloom was asleep. The Thestral certainly hadn't been faking how tired he was earlier. However, Prey couldn't be sure about Crimson, although he doubted the Pegasus would do such a thing as faking. Crimson was remarkably honest in his own self-imposed sort of way.
More the fool him.
Prey slowly and carefully shifted the blanket off himself inch by inch until he was free of its confines. Then, with his good ears strained for the slightest noise, he began letting himself slide off the bunk. He'd tested the floorboards for squeaks when he'd walked to his bed earlier, so he knew which ones to avoid as he crept towards the door. It felt far longer than the 5 seconds it took Prey to reach the door, but thankfully there was no movement from the shadowy form of Crimson's bunk, which was encouraging. Prey licked his dry lips.
All right, now for the dangerous bit.
He raised one hoof to the doorframe and prepared the form of a rune in his mind. This was the part that Prey had no idea about. Either nothing would happen, or things would go terribly, terribly wrong. The gold band on his raised foreleg felt very heavy all of a sudden as he prepared to take the plunge. Prey had studied the tracer bands as best he could, but he couldn't get a read on them, and without magical means, he wouldn't get any closer to figuring out just what Luna had strapped to his forelegs either. For that, he would need his runes, but laying a rune might trigger some enchantment on the bands that would alert Luna to what he was doing. A dilemma. There was simply no way to tell. What Prey was doing was conducting a little test. He would place a lesser rune on the doorframe, one which would record when someone entered or left the room. If nothing happened, then he'd work from there. If he was caught, well, he had a number of explanations and good excuses ready, but doubted they would do him much good.
Here goes nothing.
Prey concentrated and traced the pattern of the rune on the doorframe, forcing it into existence. It glowed yellow faintly for a brief moment in the darkness, then faded away into the woodwork. There was no explosion of miasma or star-spangled darkness. No vengeful nightmare teleporting in to rip him limb from limb. Perhaps she hadn't been alerted yet, or maybe she was too busy to come right now. That didn't mean she wouldn't drop in later, though. Prey shivered at that thought and slunk back to his bunk. For now, Prey had done all he could risk. He'd have to wait for the morning light to reveal the outcome. Morning came, far too quickly and yet not soon enough for Prey. The nervous suspense as he lay in the dark, against the wish for it to just be over with, was nothing new. Many a night in the dark forest had been spent that way while something prowled about. But familiarity didn't make it any less unpleasant. Much as he hated his weakness, fear was the one emotion that he never could control. It could rob even the most bloodthirsty warrior of the ability to fight. He'd seen it before. So, when the first early morning hoof falls of guards finishing their night shifts filtered in from the corridor, and still no squad of unicorns burst through the door, horns aglow, it was definitely something of a relief. Prey lay curled up under the blanket, a tight little bundle of wool and warm covers. Of course, now that most of the immediate danger had passed, he was reluctant to leave his soft cocoon.
So,
he thought as he lay there with the blankets over his head,
my current state of relative comfort and peace leads me to the conclusion that these tracer bands don't pick up runes. Or the old runic alphabet at any rate.
That was huge. It opened the way for so many opportunities to deceive and scheme. Of course, things were never that simple. Maybe Luna had realized, but she was waiting to see what he did now that he thought he was unobserved. Watching and waiting while giving Prey enough rope to hang himself with. Toying with Prey by letting him think he had a chance. Another possibility was that she'd been alerted that he had done something, but didn't know what that something was. At least, not yet. She could still be tracking back exactly what it was. Or another possible theory was that she did indeed know, and knew of the old runic alphabet too. But as the rune was a small and weak one, she wasn't concerned. But if he did display anything stronger, she would stir herself up like some Ursa Major annoyed from her lair, to strike down the impudent fool who dared disturb it. Such outcomes were just as possible, and he wouldn't know what his golden shackles were capable of until he prepared a runic array to help him analyze them. Hence his dilemma. Prey was interrupted from further contemplation on the subject by a horrible buzzing ring that jerked him upright and out of his bed in alarm. Within half a second, he'd rolled under the bed, trusting in the only hiding place he had in the room to shield himself against whatever was about to happen.
Ugh, is night over already?
Came a muffled groan from Gloom's bunk. A hoof emerged and landed on a small round clock set on the floor by the sergeant's bunk. Prey had seen it there last night when he'd surveyed the room for dangers, but thought nothing of it. It was only now, after the initial second of panic, that Prey finally worked out where the jarringly loud noise was coming from. Abruptly, the ringing ceased, and with a yawn, Gloom sat up. There was the sound of movement from Crimson's bunk, although from his current position under the bed, Prey couldn't see the red Pegasi. Gloom heard it too, and poked his head out to glance in that direction.
"Morning. Up and at 'em. We leave for breakfast in 5 minutes,"
he said, then glanced over at Prey's empty bed and stiffed.
"Where's Prey?"
he demanded sharply. Prey crawled out from under his bunk and glared at Gloom, or, more accurately, his clock, which he made such an awful noise.
"What is that?"
he asked scornfully. Gloom blinked at him.
"It's an alarm clock,"
he said slowly.
"Haven't you seen one before? Wait, scratch that. Were you sleeping under the bed?" "Of course not!"
Prey snapped.
"And you never said anything about an alarm clock,"
he accused Gloom.
"Why would I have? It's just an alarm clock,"
Gloom said in bemusement.
"Well, not something a fully pony barracks would have, because it would just be plain inconsiderate to everybody else. The ISND is only us at present, and we can't afford to oversleep,"
Gloom told Prey as he rose and started to pull his armor out from the hoof locker.
"That clock wasn't there the night before last,"
Prey said.
"Nah, but I picked it up. Thought we should best get into the habit,"
Gloom responded, only half listening. A flap of wings indicated that Crimson had also vacated his top bunk, but if Prey hadn't had as sensitive ears as he did, he would have missed the sound of the Pegasi's hooves touching down.
A warrior's landing. What was he doing under the bed? Bit jumpy. How hasn't he seen an alarm clock in his whole life? A households in Equestria must have one.
Thankfully, however, Gloom kept his annoying questions to himself. Crimson's thoughts were as masked as ever this morning. "Good morning, sir. Good morning, Prey," Crimson abruptly said in his flat tone, rather off in the timing of his greeting. They weren't even looking at Crimson when he'd said that.
What is with him? At times he's elegant but controlled, and at others awkward and socially insecure,
Prey thought.
"Good morning, Crimson. Sleep well?"
Gloom responded cheerfully enough, glancing up from tightening the straps on his shin guards to offer a brief smile. "Well enough," Crimson said after a moment.
"So, what do you have lined up for today? Obviously whatever Captain Nighthawk has for us, organizing the files from yesterday, picking up Crimson's armor from Carrot. Did I miss anything out?"
Prey asked Gloom.
"Hope he doesn't speak like that to the lieutenant or it'll be trouble."
Gloom's thoughts were tinged with traces of annoyance, but he didn't outwardly show it.
"The armor and paperwork will have to wait. It's going to be another long day, I'm afraid. After breakfast, we're reporting straight to the Lieutenant Swift Arrow of the Royal Guard for a briefing on the situation,"
Gloom answered, picking up his helmet and putting it on, making sure his ears didn't end up squashed. "And what situation is that, sir?" Crimson asked.
"We'll get details at the briefing. Now come on, we're going to miss breakfast."
They didn't miss breakfast. In fact, they were among the first there. Cookie was happy to see Prey, same as yesterday, and Prey played the act of the little lamb again for her, being polite and bubbly. She returned his childish attention with warm affection and disdained Gloom and Crimson.
"I didn't know Cookie could smile,"
Gloom thought. Fear of getting killed by Luna or not, Prey still gobbled down his tasteless oatmeal in record speed before the other two even had started. They passed Honey Topaz as they were exiting, the Earth Pony mare from yesterday who had so enthusiastically hugged Prey. She pouted in dismay as she saw Prey leaving.
"Oh, Cuddles is getting away!"
Prey picked up his pace. They went down into a part of the Royal Guard section of the palace they had not seen yet, and assumed that this was the Royal Guard half. That would certainly fit with the thoughts he picked up from the Royal Guards they passed.
"Bat pony again? Humph, not got my hoof."
"Not my problem. Wouldn't be if they hadn't have a reason, so I won't challenge him." And of course,
"A lamb? How'd she get in here?
Oh wait, I think I heard something about that." Thankfully, Gloom brought them to their destination quickly, Lieutenant Swift Arrow's office, whose door was open. Inside, the pony who could only be Swift Arrow, a unicorn, was sitting behind the desk, talking to another Royal Guard unicorn who was standing at attention. Swift Arrow glanced over at the other unicorn's shoulder and spotted Gloom about to knock. "Come in, Sergeant. Shut the door behind you," he called out.
"Sir, my fellows?"
Gloom asked, indicating Crimson, who looked as placid as ever, and Prey, who was deeply annoyed that Gloom had pointed him out to these two unicorns, and fearful. "Bring them in too. It'll save time," Swift Arrow decided. "A lamb? What joke is this? Princess Luna goes too far." Once Gloom had shut the door and they all stood in line next to the other unicorn, who was still holding attention, Swift Arrow cleared his throat and began. Right, I won't waste time. There's been an incident. An earth pony, name of Tulip Bed, appears to have had her foal stolen. Foal napping is a serious crime, one we haven't seen at Canterlot for over a year. This is big, but what's worse is that Tulip Bed has no memory of her foal. Her memories were stolen, Swift Arrow said grimly. There was a moment of silence as they all digested that. Prey, from listening to Gloom's thoughts, saw that the Thestral had known most of this yesterday, but still didn't know the fine details. No, those were known only by the other unicorn in the room, who was currently standing at attention next to them. This is Private Twinning Ivy. Who was the other one called out to the scene? Private Ivy, if you would, the lieutenant asked.
Yes, sir,
Twinning Ivy said, snapping off a quick salute before turning about to face the three of them, settling back into attention again.
Tulip Bed, 27 years of age. First alerted her neighbors last night when she felt something was wrong, but was unable to pinpoint what it was, only that something was off. Her neighbors, a pair of flatmates, calmed her down and questioned her about what was wrong.
Ivy paused to take a breath.
When they asked after her young colt, Rocky Bed, Earth Pony colt aged 5, she didn't know what they were talking about. After further questioning and Tulip Bed's continued denial that she had a son, they naturally called the Royal Guard. There was no sign of a struggle in her house. From asking the primary school teacher, it was found Rocky Bed had attended school yesterday before his mother picked him up. This puts the full napping time anywhere between 3 and 7:30 in the evening when Tulip alerted her neighbors, Ivy said.
So, Swift Arrow moved to finish, Captain Shining Armor gave this case to Captain Nighthawk on his request, and apparently assigned it to you. There was a note of suppressed displeasure in his voice, and a much louder one in his thoughts. I expect you to solve this as quickly as possible. A foal is at risk, and there's no room for buck-ups. I have royal guards out searching every place they can think of, but we're keeping it quiet. Don't want to spook this criminal. I expect you to report back to me personally, not just Captain Nighthawk this evening. Clear? Swift Arrow asked.
Yes, sir,
Gloom and Crimson replied in unison. Prey just tried to look as unassuming as possible in the presence of the two unicorns. Already they were forgetting about him. Good. Private Ivy will give you the directions to the house. Tulip Bed is staying with the neighbors with a guard posted outside the house. Anything else you want to ask, Sergeant? Swift Arrow asked briskly.
Just some specifics, if you would, sir,
Gloom said. Ask away. Twinning Ivy has most of the details. Gloom nodded and looked to Ivy.
Yes, we found a couple photos in the house. You can see them when we get there,
Ivy answered. Prey didn't know what a photo was, but he got the concept of a picture capturing a moment in time from the thoughts of those around him. He could also tell that Twinning Ivy was secretly very uncomfortable around the Thestral.
Do we have any leads, tracks, or evidence?
Gloom asked. Not yet. That's what we hope you can find, Swift Arrow said, answering for the private.
All right, just one more question. Is there a way to restore Tulip's memories? It would probably solve this crime straight away.
Ivy and Swift Arrow seemed to share a look, one between unicorns who'd just been asked a stupid question.
Sir, mind magic is forbidden in every form. No pony can just restore her memories. It doesn't work like that,
Ivy replied. Even the palace doctors only have limited procedures they can try, and they have to take those slowly and carefully. Most likely, Tulip Bed will eventually regain her stolen memories on her own. But we can't afford to wait. A colt's life could be at risk here, Swift Arrow added. Prey found their knowledge interesting, if flawed. If Tulip's memories had been stolen, they wouldn't return on their own. That would only happen if they'd been suppressed instead. That was much easier to do than erasing them, and from what he'd read, magical accidents resulting in suppressed memories sometimes occurred because of miscast spells, which was probably where Arrow and Ivy's misconception came from.
All right, thank you for explaining that. We'll leave immediately, sir,
Gloom said. You do that. Twinning Ivy, follow them and give Sergeant Gloom the directions. Dismissed! Canterlot, the capital of Equestria, seat of the Sun Queen and more recently the Night Queen too. Home to the rich, the privileged, and the wealthy. A place of marvels, the old city of Unicornia, full of heritage and history. Prey hated it. This was the first time he'd been out of the palace and walked Canterlot's famous streets. The first time he'd been in a locked guard carriage, so that didn't count. But now, after receiving the directions from Twinning Ivy, here they were. All it had taken was a full kidnapping, magical restraints, the return of Nightmare Moon, a series of magical thefts, a stint with the Solar Guard, and 57 years in prison to get here. He remembered the Resistance's grand schemes for one day toppling Canterlot. No one had ever really believed them. It was just an idealist dream. Prey also remembered his old life, where Fleece had once joked with his younger brother about Gossamer one day making it into Canterlot's prestigious university. What a bad joke that had been. It was probably a mercy that Gossamer was gone, or else he might have felt something as he looked up at the shining spires and glittering towers.
I hate this place.
It was like his brief glance at Van Hoover, except more so in every way. All the neatly paved streets and sidewalks, except cleaner. All the beautiful houses and impressive mansions, except bigger. The happy, well-off pony residents, except dressed finer. That little bit extra wherever you looked. All it did was remind Prey of what they'd never had. Then again, privilege like this was reserved for ponies only. For just like Van Hoover, there were no members of any other species in sight, only the multicolored coats of the pony race thronging the wide streets. Prey doubted if a sheep had ever set hoof inside the capital before. The way that some of the finely dressed ponies they passed had to stop and look at him incredulously, it certainly seemed possible. Or perhaps it was just the Thestral leading their merry little band. He was certainly racking up the unfriendly and haughty stares. Grim pretended to ignore their looks and the way their mothers pulled their foals closer across the street and stallions pulling their noses in the air, but Prey, as he struggled to keep up, knew that the Thestral noticed. The night guard shouldn't have to go out in the day. This is what happens. Gloom avoided the prosperous main streets, but even then, the structural quality of the buildings they passed on the side streets was still obvious. No graying mortar or worn brick, only fine-cut stone and freshly painted houses. Prey was kept busy trying to read every sign and street name, every shop banner and front window they passed, all the while trying to keep up.
You know, one of us could carry you. You don't look like you weigh more than a feather, Gloom offered. Don't touch me, Prey panted. Curse this malnutrition. And curse their long legs,
he thought. Hurrying over the polished cobbles of the side alley, Gloom had cut them down. If his muscles weren't still weak, he could have kept up just fine. It would be far easier for you, Crimson observed, trotting along quite comfortably.
No, thank you,
Prey all but growled. It sounded more like a wheeze.
Seriously though, if you can't keep up, I'm gonna carry you,
Gloom told him, eyes swiveling back and forth as he tried to recall which turn of the approaching junction they were supposed to take.
Was it Marigold Street or Cutterdale Street? I've kept up fine so far, and Twinning Ivy said Marigold Street, sir,
Prey grunted, focusing on not slipping on the polished cobblestones.
Pardon?
Gloom asked in surprise.
You were looking lost. It's Marigold Street. Except I think we were supposed to come from the other end. But because you took a shortcut, we're on this end instead, Prey answered.
You worked that out already? Have you been to Canterlot before?
No. I just paid attention to the street names. It's not difficult,
Prey said, breathing hard.
Well then, I'm pretty sure we're almost there,
Gloom said.
2 lefts, then a second right,
Prey agreed, taking a moment to catch his breath.
Yeah, definitely not mentally at full. I think you should probably be in charge of stuff like navigation and the finer details in the future. How good are you at paperwork?
Gloom asked with perhaps a tad too much excitement in his voice.
Don't know yet. Haven't done any before, have I?
Prey lied, thinking back to the investigation Captain Valor had forced him to conduct. He was glad that they hadn't run into any of the Solar Guard in the palace yet. Prey would rather not test how successful the runic memory trap he'd left them had worked. He did well yesterday, sorting the files, Crimson commented.
If only all paperwork were that simple. But there's all sorts of rules and regulations. I'm surprised you can sneeze without filing the correct form in advance and getting it signed off by duly appointed sneeze authority. I still have to go sign all those things for Taffy, Gloom moaned.
It was quite obvious when they arrived at the crime scene. The 2 royal guards standing outside the door kind of gave it away. The house was one in a small series of red-roofed, terraced homes with a small flower garden in front of each. A bit of a step down from the large, spacious houses they'd been passing, but still attractive as homes in their own right, and about 8 times the size of Gossamer's old home before it burned. Gloom nodded to the 2 royal guards, who gave the 3 of them funny looks. A Thestral? An out-of-uniform Pegasus? And a baby sheep? But they didn't stop them. Gloom knocked and then pushed the door open without waiting for an answer.
Hello? he called out. This is the Night God. We're here on behalf of Princess Luna. Looking for Tulip Bed?
Come in. She's in here with us, came a call down from the short corridor. They wiped their hooves on the welcome mat and made their way inside. Passing down the short hall lined with picture frames, they stepped into what must have been the living room. A brown earth pony with a dark green mane stood up from one of the two sofas to greet them. Please, take a seat. You're earlier than we expected. His breath caught as he spotted Gloom, and it was only after moments stuttering that he managed to continue. Please, do sit down. Can I get you anything? Tea or coffee? He asked with a small, nervous laugh. Or perhaps some blood? His thoughts added unbidden.
We're fine, thank you, Mr.
Sorry. Where are my manners? Holly Leaf. His hoof twitched as if he might offer it, but apparently thought better of it.
We're here to see Miss Tulip Bed. It's reported that she stayed the night with you and your housemate?
Gloom asked, staying polite despite the annoyance Prey could read in his thoughts. Yes, that's right. Holly Leaf stepped back around to the side of the sofa that had its back facing them. Tulip, I'm afraid you need to wake up now, he said, shaking the unseen figure lying down. There was a groan and a muffled, Where am I?
Tulip Bed, it's Holly Leaf, your next door neighbor. You remember that, right?
Holly Leaf asked with some concern. There was a pause.
Yeah,
came the quiet answer. Oh, good, Holly Leaf said with obvious relief. Jumpin' Jack's still sleeping, but there's some of the the night guard here. They want to speak to you, he told the still prone figure anxiously. Okay. There was a pause. I still can't remember. No, that's a shame. Holly Leaf laughed nervously, again, eyes flicking between the still patiently waiting Gloom and Crimson. I'll just go wake up Jumpin' Jack. I'll leave you all here to do your, investigation, or something, Holly Leaf said, backing towards the door. Call if you need anything. Thank you, Gloom said, stepping around to the other sofa, and finally getting a clear view of Tulip Bed, Crimson following him. Prey, however, was already there. While they'd been talking, he'd simply snuck around the end of the far sofa and was sitting against its armrest, partially hidden from view. He'd also taken the opportunity to scan the room.
Quite a few things I don't know the name or purpose of, but nothing suspicious.
And, of course, to examine Holly Leaf and Tulip Bed's thoughts.
Holly Leaf appears to be exactly what he seems, a concerned, if nervous, neighbor. I don't know about Jumping Jack. Haven't met him.
Prey'd gotten the impression of a unicorn from Holly Leaf's thoughts.
Tulip Bed, however, is another matter.
Prey couldn't read any obvious signs of memory or mind alteration or tampering. The mayor's thoughts were clear and well-jointed, if a bit scared. However, someone's surface thoughts gave absolutely no indication as to the state of the mind that lay underneath. Without setting hoof on Tulip Bed and invading her mind directly, he wouldn't know.
This is interesting, worrying, and interesting.
The mare herself was orange-dappled earth pony, with a dirty brown mane braided into a messy plaint that was coming undone. She sat up slowly on the sofa, pushing aside the blanket she'd slept under, eyes still heavy with sleep, and strands of fur sticking out from a rough night. She certainly looked the part.
Miss Tulip Bed?
Gloom asked just to be sure.
Yes, that's me,
she answered quietly, pulling the blankets around her knees.
I'm Sergeant Gloom, of the Night Guard, part of a division set up by Princess Luna called the ISND. We deal with incidents like this one that is reported to have taken place yesterday evening, the full napping of your full rocky bed. Yes, rocky bed, my full, so they tell me,
Tulip said, looking away. So they tell you? Gloom asked.
Yeah, I mean, it must be true. I know something's wrong, but I can't remember him. There's the pictures and evening with me and Rocky, but I can't remember them. He told me some pony cast a spell on me and stole my memories? Is that true?
Tulip asked, fidgeting with the blanket.
Yes, they told you the truth. Your neighbors remember Rocky, his primary school teacher remembers him. You've got pictures of him, so he exists and is indeed your son,
Gloom said, trying to sound comforting.
Yeah,
Tulip trailed off. Do you want a son, even though you can't remember having one, ma'am? Crimson asked abruptly. Prey smirked. Crimson had hit the nail right on the head. It had been floating around in the mayor's thoughts, but Tulip hadn't wanted to say anything. Tulip started.
Yes, of course. Of course I do. If I have a son, of course I would want him back. What mother wouldn't if she had a foal stolen from her? But are you really a mother if you don't believe you are one? Does it still count if other ponies are the only ones that tell you you have a child?
Prey asked. Tulip jumped, not having spotted Prey. Who are you? She demanded.
This is Prey. He's with us,
Gloom assured her. Then, turning to Prey,
what do you mean by asking something like that?
Prey brushed aside Gloom's angry tone, focusing intently on Tulip Bed.
Do you feel trapped? A feeling of being bound by obligations to a child you don't know, and for all intents and purposes, have never loved?
No, I mean, yes. No, like, who are you?
I'm nobody, just a little freak. Never mind, just forget about it. A passing thought, nothing more,
Prey said, shrugging and finally dropping his gaze. Gloom was giving Prey a hard look. I'm sorry, Miss Tulip Bed. My colleague...
He's not finished. Tell me, Tulip, do you have any memory of leaving your house between 3 and 4 o'clock?
Prey cut in. Tulip Bed gripped the blanket, eyes darting this way and that. No, I don't.
No memory of the primary school?
Prey asked.
No. How about the teacher's name?
He pressed.
Yes. Her name is Miss Pottery. Strange. Why would you know her name? Have you ever met her before?
Prey asked, affecting a curious tone.
No, I'm sure I haven't met her. Then how do you know her name?
Tulip shrunk under the diminutive sheep's questions.
I don't know,
she mumbled.
I think it's safe to say that the mind mage who did this to you was very thorough. He, or she, either went through all of your memories with a fine-tooth comb and erased every single one involving taking your foal to school, or they somehow used a trigger memory linked to Rocky Bed to wipe them all out.
Prey observed thoughtfully, as if he was talking about an arithmetic problem, not a person.
So this unicorn, or unicorns, were skilled. That leaves little avenue for finding out how this was done. Instead, we should focus on who...
Excuse me, Gloom cut in, moving over to grab Prey. We need to discuss our findings so far. Please excuse us a moment, he said to Tulip as he pushed Prey into the corner, Crimson following closely behind.
Don't touch me!
Prey hissed, backing up. Unfortunately, there was nowhere to go. He tried to ignore the stirrings of instinctual panic as he found himself cornered. Gloom took a deep breath before letting it through his nose. All right, I'm not even angry. I'm not sure why I still expect anything different. I see a lamb, but there is no lamb. Right, I gotta remember that. Gloom seemed to be talking to himself more than anything with that last one. He sighed again and rubbed his eyes.
All right, Prey. We'll give you the benefit of the doubt. It's clear you have figured out something. Although, how you know anything about mind magic like you were talking about back there is beyond me. So, spill it. What's going on?
Gloom asked. Prey belatedly realized he might have appeared a bit too knowledgeable about mind magics just now.
Careless,
he berated himself.
Well, it's more a theory based off what Ivy and Swift Arrow said.
Lieutenant Swift Arrow.
About her memories being locked away and eventually coming back on their own. So I just thought I'd see if I could trigger her memories to return sooner.
Prey offered. It wasn't entirely a lie, so it shouldn't trigger Gloom's special talent. What you first said about Tulip Bed not wanting to be a mother, Crimson stated. Prey knew what he was asking, even if the Pegasus didn't phrase it as a question.
I had a hunch, and my concern was right. She doesn't feel like she's lost anything, and so doesn't feel much need to reclaim it. It's a responsibility she doesn't want, but propriety tells her she must accept because it's the right thing to do. Reclaim her full, Rocky Bed,
Prey added, in case it wasn't obvious.
How does this affect the investigation?
Gloom asked. Prey considered.
Not much, actually. Unless we get her full back, that is. In that case, there might be problems in the future life. Just something to be aware of,
he asked. Personally, he didn't care, but it would be good to appear like he did. Gloom groaned.
Great, another problem to take care of.
Possibly. Do you feel it will become one? Crimson asked.
Maybe, maybe not. It's a problem for the future, though. For now, let's stick to finding Rocky Bed.
That stallion, Hollyleaf, he seemed too nervous. I wouldn't trust him, Crimson said.
I don't think it's anything. I'm pretty sure he's just scared by the night god. And me,
Gloom added in an undertone before clearing his throat and continuing.
It's nothing new. That's how civilians usually react, unfortunately. We're not the royal god that they trust, and, well,
Gloom bared his fangs.
Actually, it's out of the ordinary when they do accept us.
He looked at Prey and muttered.
I always thought it was unusual that a lamb didn't react. Now, of course, I know that unusual doesn't even begin to cover it. You might want to stick to solving this crime first before you go throwing out compliments like that, Prey told him sweetly. We still have yet to figure out anything.
He stressed the we to show he was part of the team and actually cared. Not.
Well, if you have a solution, I'm open to suggestions, Gloom said.
You're sure there's nothing off about Hollyleaf, sir? Crimson asked.
Fairly sure.
Your talent telling you that, sir? Crimson pressed.
No, it only lets me know when something's amiss, not when something's right. If that makes sense. And it's not an exact science. It's just a feeling sometimes. Can't really rely on it,
Gloom answered with an apologetic shrug. Prey sighed. This was painful to listen to.
If you let me ask all the questions, I'm sure we can get us something. You can pretend it was you later and take all the credit or whatever. Just don't get in my way, he told them.
Crimson didn't seem too keen on the idea.
More questions like the ones you already asked?
His flat tone still effectively managed to convey his skepticism. He has a point. You weren't very tactful in what you said to Tulip Bed earlier. Gloom agreed.
But I learned something for us. I can do this, if you'll let me. Help me or stand aside. I don't care. Just don't get in my way,
Prey said, his tone firm. Gloom looked down at Prey, clearly unconvinced. But before he could say anything, Crimson spoke. Sir, why not? Prey is weird. I mean, he has a unique viewpoint. Perhaps you can see something we cannot, the Pegasus suggested. Gloom paused.
Yeah, why not? Tulip doesn't trust me already. Nothing wrong with giving Prey a chance. We're on the same team. But why did he say I should take the credit earlier? Nah, it doesn't matter. Stay focused. We've talked long enough already. Hollyleaf and Jumpin' Jack won't be coming out of their room till we're gone. Or you go and get them. They want as little to do with the Night Guard and the Thestrals as the rest of these ponies, but are too polite or scared to say it to your face, sir, Prey interrupted.
Gloom and Crimson grimaced slightly before the sergeant continued.
Tulip's waited long enough, and we have a foal to find. I know I'm going to regret this, but fine, we'll do it your way, Prey. But only because you look so much more approachable than us.
Until they get to know you, Crimson added.
But if you take it too far, I'm stepping in,
Gloom warned him. Prey rolled his eyes, but nodded to show he understood.
All right, sir, he huffed. I mean it. We're here to help, not hurt,
Gloom stressed as he turned back.
What do you think I'm gonna do? Bite her or something? Terrifying! A runt salvaging a full-grown earth pony!
Prey muttered sarcastically. Gloom and Crimson either ignored him or pretended not to hear.
Thank you for waiting, Tulip Bed. We've discussed your situation, and we have a few more questions.
Tulip looked up from where she'd just been sitting despondently on the sofa, fiddling with the blanket.
Oh, okay. What do you want to know? I can't remember anything about Rocky, so I can't answer any questions about him, she said, looking away. We understand that, but if you could still answer the questions to the best of your ability, it would help us out a great deal, Gloom told her. All right. What do you want to know, sir?
Tulip asked, forcing herself to meet the Sergeant Thestral's eyes. She managed it for all of 3 seconds before having to look away again.
Scary nightmare eyes.
Gloom cleared his throat.
Actually, it's Prey here who has the questions. Prey, if you would,
he said, gesturing the sheep forwards. Tulip looked back up uncertainly at that.
The lamb? But why? How? But earlier. Hello? Prey, was it?
She asked hesitantly.
Why, yes. Sorry for what I asked earlier. I didn't mean any of it like that,
Prey said bashfully.
No, it's fine. I didn't. Well, that's good,
Prey cut in cheerfully.
Because I have lots more questions.
He dropped the smile.
Who do you think took your foal?
Tulip was taken aback by the sudden change.
I don't know any pony. Who would you suspect then? Or to put it another way, who would want to take your foal?
Prey asked.
I really don't know any pony who would want to do something like that. They're all my friends. What about Rocky's father?
Prey pushed. Tulip stalled.
What? You haven't made any mention of the father. Do you even remember who the father was? Evidently he's not around anymore. Did you part on bad terms? When was the last time you saw him? Where does he live? Would he have either the motivation or ability to abduct Rocky?
Prey asked, each probing question causing Tulip to stutter as she tried to form a coherent answer. Answers which he read clear in her thoughts.
What? No, that's not possible. But What if... No, I don't...
Prey sat back on his haunches and regarded her smugly.
Ah, I see. You do have some idea who the father is. From 4 or 5 years ago, right? And you did part on bad terms. Just before or after Rocky was born, I bet. Not that you'd remember. Tell us, what was his name?
Tulip was looking more and more like a trapped animal.
If it's him, it would have been...
She looked down in shame.
Patch. Coat Patch,
she whispered.
And where does Coat Patch live? I'm assuming not in Canterlot. So an outlying town or village? Let me guess. Your parents wouldn't have approved. Do you even remember that much?
Prey asked, ignoring Gloom's hiss to tone it down. He was doing this his way.
No, there was no falling out,
Tulip protested.
Then when was the last time you spoke with them? Why aren't they here right now to comfort you? I thought that's what families are for. Wait, don't tell me you didn't get in contact with them yet to let them know about what's happening. Now, why do you think that is?
Tulip Bed's jaw worked soundlessly as she gaped at Prey. He continued,
It's because your memory has been tampered with. Your foal, the father, giving birth, and all the linking incidents have all been removed from your memory. So it's not just the memories of Rocky that have been affected. Other things have been lost as well.
Prey explained. Crimson and Gloom were looking like they were just beginning to catch sight of the picture Prey was painting. Prey, too, was impressed, although for a different reason.
Whoever did this was very skilled and very thorough. They didn't leave much behind for me to work with.
It was also worrying. It was increasingly plain that this kidnapping was part of something bigger.
But I...
Tulip gulped, looking close to tears.
I don't know what to do. What else have I forgotten? I don't know, she cried.
Easy there, Tulip Bed.
Breathe. We're here to help,
Gloom said, stepping forwards to offer her a comforting wing. Tulip flinched back, then flinched again as she realized she'd done so. You could see the thoughts playing upon her face. Fear of offending the night guard sergeant, fear that she'd been caught doing so, then indecision as Tulip tried to work out if she'd cared right now. Then back to realization and fear of the situation she was in. It warmed Prey's heart to observe.
What do I do? Why me? I don't want this. I don't want to deal with this,
Tulip cried, the first tear starting to slide down her cheek. Surprisingly, it was Crimson who stepped up. The waning moon knows Prey wasn't going to offer her any comfort, and Tulip was too distraught to accept any from Gloom. Tulip Bed, your tears solve nothing. The longer we sit here doing nothing, the further away they could be taking Rocky Bed. Crimson took another step closer. And also the further away the ones who have done this to you will be getting. He paused, making sure he had Tulip's rapt attention before he continued. You may not have any memories of your fool to care about, but you care about what's been stolen from you. Life isn't fair, and if you want justice, you will have to work for it. If you are not willing to try, why should we? Crimson asked. Tulip's throat worked as she looked up into Crimson's hard yellow eyes, trying to find an answer.
But I don't.
No excuses, just the truth. Lies are at the root of all evils. So answer me honestly, are you willing to try? Crimson interrupted, but not as coldly as he could have done. Tulip hesitated for a long moment, then slowly nodded. She gulped, taking a minute to compose herself enough to be able to talk once again.
Yes. yes, I can.
She swallowed and sat up straighter.
What do you want me to do?
Answer the rest of Prey's questions. It will help find these ponies, Crimson told her, stepping back into the line alongside Gloom, who gave him a small nod of approval. Tulip steeled herself and looked to Prey expectantly. Prey wondered if he should ruin the moment by saying that he didn't actually have any more questions and that he'd just been going to suggest instead that they went next door and had a look through Tulip Bed's house for tracks. Prey decided it would be a poorly thought out idea. So, instead, he quickly made up a question.
It probably would have been removed from your memories, but we would be remiss if not asking if you remember any strange events that have occurred recently. Shadows outside your window, drawers searched, the garden disturbed, anything like that? He asked.
Prey already knew the answer. Whomever this mind mage was, they'd gone to a lot of trouble to remove all traces of the fool from Tulip's memory. There was no way they would forget to erase any incriminating evidence as well. Still, Tulip gave it her best effort, brow scrunched up as she thought as hard as she could. However, after a full 2 minutes, she was forced to concede,
I can't think of anything. Nothing's coming to mind.
sorry.
In that case, we're done here, Prey announced brightly.
He looked up at Gloom.
Perhaps we should go search next door now to see if we can find anything, sir? He suggested.
Gloom nodded.
Thank you for your time, Tulip Bed, and for your courage in answering our questions. The Royal Guard will be remaining outside this residence to protect you. If you do remember anything at all, please let them know. You have my word that we will do everything we can to bring this matter to a close, he assured Tulip.
Thank you, and I will, Tulip said.
Will you be all right if we see ourselves out, or would you like us to call Holly Leaf?
Tulip sniffed, putting on a wobbly smile.
No, I'll be fine, thank you, she answered. Moon protect you, ma'am,
Gloom said by way of goodbye as he led the way out the door. Crimson gave her a parting nod, and Prey didn't even look back. Gloom passed a couple of words to the royal guards on the way out to let them know what was going on, and that they were going into Tulip Bed's house to look for clues.
Learn anything?
One of them asked.
Nothing worth mentioning,
Gloom called back as they walked out the gate and down the 5 paces of sidewalk to the garden path of Tulip's front door. Even in the short space of time they'd been inside Holly Leaf and Jumping Jack's house, Celestia's sun had cleared the rooftops and was now shining brightly, chasing away the last vestiges of shadows cast in the street. Prey saw how the Thestral night guards had to squint and lower their eyes under the bright sun, even in that short walk around to Tulip Bed's house. Crimson, despite having far superior night vision to Prey from what he'd observed, didn't seem overly negatively affected by the higher light levels. Tulip Bed certainly lived up to her name. The small garden was full of tulips in early bloom.
That's kind of sad,
Prey caught Gloom thinking as they passed the colorful blooms. Crimson even stopped briefly to smell a particularly big red one leaning onto the path, but didn't eat it. Prey was slightly tempted, but it would probably make Gloom angry at him. Besides, he hated tulips.